It's the Joe Pag Show. Glad to have you. Really glad to have back the Republican senator from the great state of Texas, friend of mine, Ted Cruz. Ted, how's it going?
Pags, it's going terrific. Great to be with you.
Always a pleasure to have you on. We're all watching what's happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding areas in Minnesota after the death of George Floyd. And I watched that video. I know that you've watched the video. All of America seems now has watched that video. I can't for the life of me figure out why anybody would have his knee on the neck of somebody for 9 minutes, a guy who was subdued, who wasn't fighting, a guy who was in handcuffs. And we all want justice. And I think standing up for justice and protesting is our right. I know that that's our right. But seeing looting and mayhem and Antifa and Black Lives Matter causing so many issues in that great city and really, really poor and weak leadership, we've got a combination here. It's a perfect storm of mayhem. Ted, what are your thoughts on what you see, starting from the death of George Floyd to what we see today?
Well, I think you're right, Joe. And let's start with what happened to George Floyd. It was horrific. It was inexcusable, and it was wrong. It was police brutality. And, you know, often when you have an officer-involved shooting, they can become a media circus. And too many players in the political world, too many players in the media world are very quick to immediately blame the police officer, to demonize the police officer.
Yeah.
And I have long advised, let the criminal justice system operate, let it work, and see what the facts are. In this instance, we have a different set of facts. Namely, we have the video of George Floyd. He is handcuffed. He is incapacitated. He is face down on the pavement. The officer's knee is on his neck. And for over 8 minutes, George Floyd is gasping for breath. He's saying he can't breathe. He's asking for help. He's clearly in medical distress.
Yeah.
He evidently presents zero threat to the officer. There are multiple officers surrounding him. He's not a physical threat. There is no legitimate law enforcement purpose for what that officer did. I am very glad the Department of Justice opened the civil rights investigation into it, and I'm very glad to see the Minneapolis prosecutor bring a homicide case. On the face of it, that video is horrific. It is wrong, and justice needs to be served.
Could not agree more.
Go ahead. Well, look, afterwards, I understand the people of Minnesota, people all across the country and the world being horrified at what they saw. They were rightly horrified at what they saw. But the answer is not to engage in more violence. It's not to engage in looting and destruction and destroying the community. And ironically, when you're destroying the community, you're often destroying the businesses and places of work and residences of the people whose rights you are ostensibly trying to protect. And so I would call to everyone in Minneapolis and beyond not to engage in acts of violence. Free speech is absolutely protected.
Yep.
But looting and violence are not, and it's not the answer. In this case, the answer is for the criminal justice system to punish an officer who violated the law.
It is the senator for the great state of Texas, Republican Ted Cruz. You know, Ted, we watch weak leadership like Jacob Fry, the mayor, like the Governor Walz, like Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, for God's sakes. These are people who have they've dragged their feet to stop this looting, this rioting. They obviously, the police chief is somebody who is not getting the job done. If somebody in his system can act like this towards somebody in the community. You've got Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, saying, take a soft hand when dealing with rioters and looters. The rioting and the looting is well beyond Minneapolis, burning down any Target store they can find for some reason. Target brings in jobs and brings in revitalization to the area. What can we do as a society to stop the violence and to implore communities like this to get leadership that really is looking out for them? These leaders seem awfully weak to me.
Well, I will say that there is some irony, given that the media and political partisans try to blame everything bad on Donald Trump.
Right.
That it's worth noting that every elected official involved is a Democrat.
Yep.
From the mayor to the attorney general to the governor to both senators, that Minnesota has Democrats who like to virtue signal on just about everything. And yet this horrific wrong was carried out under their leadership. And we see that pattern over and over again. The right answer is to protect everyone's rights. And one of the problems is elected Democrats, when you're faced with an instance like this where they're conflicted, that they end up being paralyzed. And so then they're not protecting people's rights against the looting and violence either. But you know what they are doing? They sent the state police to arrest a CNN camera crew. I don't know if you watched that video.
I saw it. It was stunning.
CNN.
It was stunning.
And look, I'm not a fan of CNN. I think they're crazy partisans. But they have a First Amendment right to be journalists and to report. And I have never in my life seen journalists arrested in an American city on an American street by police officers on live TV. That was inexcusable and wrong. And it's an example of too many liberal Democrats are statists. They believe in government power. These are the same people that are trying to arrest dads for playing softball with their daughters, people for driving cars, people for being on paddle boards, people for running on the beach. If you believe in government power, then sending in forces to arrest those you disagree with is consistent with your authoritarian streak. It's wrong. The job of the law enforcement, and there are a lot of good and honorable men and women in law enforcement, is to protect the citizens and protect our rights.
It was quite the irony to see that CNN reporter arrested, which is unlawful. Obviously, that arrest was not constitutional. But to see CNN, a network that has given cover to these statists and to these far left-wing progressives for so long, getting bitten themselves by it, that was very ironic. It's Ted Cruz, Senator, great state of Texas. We appreciate the time. Hard shift here to Twitter. And the idea that you're calling for criminal investigations now of Twitter. I wasn't aware of this until you did this morning. And it turns out you're going after Twitter because they might be violating the law when it comes to what is or what isn't allowed when it comes to Iran. What is this about?
Well, for a long time, there have been in place federal criminal laws that prohibit U.S. companies from giving aid and assistance to the government of Iran. The government of Iran, they are totalitarian zealots. They are rabidly anti-American, and they are the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And so U.S. law has imposed civil and criminal sanctions on any American company that helps them out. Well, Twitter has for a long time provided a platform for the Ayatollah Khamenei and for Zarif, who's part of the ruling regime,
right,
to broadcast their hate, to broadcast anti-Semitic tweets, to broadcast anti-Israel tweets, to call for violence. And Twitter provides them, facilitates their propaganda efforts under the explicit terms of the Iran sanctions. A U.S. company can't do that. And so back in February, I sent Twitter a letter, along with several other senators, pointing out that they were in violation of federal criminal law. Last month, they sent me a letter in response that said, well, their company policy was otherwise. And so they were going to continue to do it because their company policy was to give a platform to these guys. Well, you know what? Company policies don't trump the responsibility to follow federal criminal law. Now, they also argued for an exception, but it's an exception that doesn't apply under the clear terms of the law. And so today I sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney General and to the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury asking that they open a criminal investigation because Twitter is openly, brazenly, and willfully violating our sanctions law targeted at Iran.
So what can come of that? A criminal investigation, could they be charged with aiding and abetting?
They could be charged under the terms of the law. The penalties for willfully violating the law include a criminal fine of up to $1 million and a prison sentence of up to 20 years.
Nice.
Violating Iran sanctions are a big, big deal, and responsible companies don't do it. But, Pags, this just shows the arrogance, the absolute arrogance of big tech, because they're willing to defy federal law, and their view is, well, our company policy is different, so we're going to ignore this law. You know what? You don't get to do that, big guys. Everybody is bound by the criminal law, whether you agree with it or not. You don't have the right to violate the criminal law. And the brazenness, pause and think for a minute. Twitter is happy to amplify the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel terrorist threats of the Ayatollah Khamenei, and at the same time, they're actively trying to silence and censor the President of the United States because they disagree with him. What in the hell are they doing, Joe?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's Ted Cruz, the senator from the great state of Texas, so we always appreciate the time and the access. Maybe a minute left. I want to go to what the president did yesterday when it comes to 230, when it comes to what you and I have talked about for a long time, the freedom from liability that Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google all have. I'll give you a quick example. My news anchor / sidekick, Carrie, has 2,000 followers on Twitter. I've got over 90,000. As a test one day a couple of weeks ago, we both tweeted live on the air the same exact tweet at the same exact time. In 24 hours' time, she had way more likes, way more retweets than I did. That's a clear sign that somebody's being squelched and somebody isn't. Today, I posted a video of a racist that called my show yesterday. I posted it on Twitter more than 2.5 hours ago. It's gotten 183 likes so far out of 90,000 followers. On Parler, conversely, I've got 19,000 followers. I've got more than double the likes and double the echoes, which is the same thing as retweets. Clearly, Twitter is squelching the reach. That video on YouTube that I posted has 300 views so far, although 48,000 say they saw it on Parler. So there's clearly something going on here, Ted. Was the president right in what he did yesterday?
The president was right, and I have been urging the president and urging the administration to do this for 3.5 years. In the last 3.5 years, I've met repeatedly with the president, with the attorney general, with the deputy attorney general, with the head of the antitrust division at the Department of Justice, with the head of the Federal Trade Commission, with the White House chief of staff, and with the White House counsel, urging all of them. Big tech, censorship, and political bias is the single biggest threat we have to free speech and to the integrity of our election, and I'm glad to see the administration acting. We need to do much more to protect every American's right to free speech.
Will they listen or will they not listen? Big tech.
Big tech is drunk with power.
Yeah.
I tweeted out today a picture of the Emperor from Star Wars with dark lightning coming out of his fingertips. That's Jack Dorsey right now.
Right, exactly right.
They believe, these Silicon Valley billionaires believe they have untouchable power. And let me just ask one question for every listener. If Twitter can silence Donald Trump, the president of the United States, what chance does an ordinary American have?
Such a good question.
If you're not president and they disagree with your views, if they can silence the president, they can silence you, and they are doing it. And let me be clear, and they don't do it, by the way, to Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or all of them. And
no
let me
way.
be clear, I'm not saying they should. We should allow free speech. Please, let Bernie Sanders, let Joe Biden, let AOC speak as much as they like.
Yeah.
I want people to hear what they're saying because they're wrong.
Yep.
It's not the job of Silicon Valley billionaires to silence speech they don't like. We should allow free speech and protect the First Amendment.
I'll leave you with this last thought. Van Jones got in trouble with the left today because he dared call out white liberals for their racism, their cloaked racism. There was a guy that commented on Van Jones, and just included Van Jones in his comment, has 300 followers, had 22,000 likes on his comment. I made a comment about Van Jones, 52 people saw it. That's the difference here, Ted, and I think that your fight is exactly why this happened. Keep it up, and let's talk again soon. I appreciate you.
Thank you, my friend. God bless.